Hi, my name is Justin McElroy, and I am a podcaster and author and bon vivant. I don't know exactly what that is, but it feels right. We're talking about bridging the gap today, and the gap I wanted to talk with you about is a literal physical gap. Specifically, I mean the physical distance between who you are, where you are, your human body, and the job or work that you want. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I live in Huntington, West Virginia. That may be very much like where you live. It may not be. I don't know because I'm not allowed to travel. I was going to come and check it out, but no dice there. Got to the airport and they said, no international flying, apparently. So here we are. But I don't know if it's like where you live. It's a small town. It's 50,000 or so people. And I am 39 years old, 40 as you're hearing this, I believe. So when I was growing up, the internet, as we know it today, was not a going concern. So the kind of work that I wanted to do, I wanted to write about video games and talk about video games and be an entertainer. And I thought the kind of work that I wanted to do was not possible for me. And at that point, it probably wasn't. As someone living in Huntington, West Virginia, and someone growing up away from the hubs of movies and TV, even the video game magazines at the point were set out of, I think, Minneapolis and the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area. So that was an option for me. But as the internet evolved and grew, I found that I was able to sneak my way in a little bit gradually. I started pitching around to any outlet that would have me, offering to do the reviews of games that no one else wanted to play the games no one wanted. I ended up playing a lot of hunting video games and some pretty bad Spider-Man licensed games and some rather long computer RPGs that no one else wanted to sink the time into. I was willing to take the bullet, figuratively speaking, here in Huntington, West Virginia. I continued with that pattern. I worked at a blog called Joystick, which was owned by AOL. It was AOL's video game blog, sadly now defunct, but that's really sort of where I got started in working more regularly in video games. From that point, I was very lucky to build a career at Joystick. I became the reviews editor and then the managing editor, which is like the number 2 position there, and went on to found a video game site called Polygon in 2012. That is thankfully still going and still operational. While I was doing that, around about 2010, my brothers and I started podcasting. We started a podcast called My Brother, and Me. I had actually started on the Joystick podcast a couple of years before that, but My Brother, and Me was the first project we all did together. That has now grown into other spin-off shows like The Adventure Zone, which is a actual play D&D podcast, Sawbones, a medical history show I do with my wife, and then we have some other one-off things like the McElroy brothers will be in Trolls World Tour, and Till Death Do Us Blart, which is an annual review of Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 that we do every Thanksgiving. And we've turned those into other media. The Adventure Zone is a graphic novel series that's been #1 New York Times bestseller a few times, and My Brother, and Me was a TV show. We're doing an Adventure Zone animated series. We did a Sawbones book. And we're working on a book about podcasting right now. I'm telling you about myself. I don't know. I don't have a reason for that other than to say that I have done all of this here in Huntington, West Virginia. And it's always been hard, to be honest with you. I had to travel a lot to video game conventions and stuff like that, which isn't that onerous, but it gets worse as you have kids. And I've had to travel to cities just to record voiceover in studios for, we were in the movie Trolls World Tour. We had to go to Cincinnati, which is about a 3-hour drive for me in Ohio, to go record that. There are opportunities that I know I've missed out on by not being in a specific region. But by staying here in my home where I grew up, I have been able to capitalize on some strengths. For one, the cost of living where I live is much, much lower than it would be in a New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, you name it, pretty much in the United States. You're not going to do much better than me, which means I can work cheaper than a lot of other people too. I have a unique perspective being from this region. I have access to people, to characters, to stories that people in other regions may not have. It makes me a bit more of a unique talent. And the reason this is on my talent, ooh, listen to me. All right, anyway, the reason this is on my mind, the reason I wanted to talk to you about this specific gap, this idea of bridging a physical gap, is that strangely, I believe, the COVID-19 pandemic has actually created opportunities for this specific kind of work. Obviously, don't feel like it needs to be said, but holistically speaking, the COVID-19 pandemic is a negative. I think weighing all these things against each other, definitely still a negative, what with all the loss of human life, etc. But it has been interesting, as someone who has always worked remotely, it's been interesting to watch how companies who never would have permitted online work, remote work before, are now finding ways to make that happen. And I believe once these avenues have been created, it's going to be a lot easier for people who aren't able or are unwilling to travel to the larger cities that are really hubs of whatever kind of work they want to do. It'll be easier than ever for them to do that work. Let me give you an example. I recorded some voiceover work recently for a cartoon series. Now, in the past, this has always been pretty tricky because they're used to people coming into a recording studio and standing behind a microphone and looking at engineers and recording the audio there with a script in front of them. That obviously is untenable right now. So this production company had set up a sort of a back-end interface that allowed the recording to happen seamlessly for the engineer to look at my recordings and take my recordings on the fly. It allowed me to talk to the director as I was doing my voiceover. I have the sound set up already here in my office. And we were able to do it just like that with no loss in quality. This was not a surprise to me, by the way, because I've been making things like this work for a long time. But I think because of the COVID-19 pandemic, you're seeing these companies finding ways to, again, working on our theme, bridge that gap, the physical, actual gap between them and people who want to do this sort of work. So to give you another example, we recently recorded the audiobook for Everybody Has a Podcast Except You, which is our book about podcasting. Sorry. It's a little bit Ouroboros, snake eating its tail. It's a book about podcasting. And this is an audiobook of a book about podcasting. So it's kind of like a podcast of a book about podcasting. Sorry. But the point here is through tools like Zoom, the engineers were able to remotely take control of my computer and handle all the recording locally on my machine, doing all the things that they would normally do in a studio, but they had found the ways to make it work remotely. This, I think, will create a lot of opportunity for people that don't want to travel, that want to stay in their home. And that can be a really powerful thing. One, smaller areas need creative people living in them. If smaller, more rural areas are robbed of all their creative type people, it's harder to build a community for future creative workers who want to come up through that same environment. It's also, you can stay in your region with family and friends. I mean, there are huge pluses that I don't feel like I need to illuminate for you. And of course, there are always going to be things that you miss out on if you are not in the region where specific work is happening. There's no argument about that. But I think that now, in this specific weird, bizarre moment, you are going to have more opportunities to reach out to these companies who maybe before would have insisted that you live wherever they're going to live. And they would have created some ways to make things better. Now, there's always going to be weirdness when you're working out of your house. Your 6-year-old daughter may come and tell you your TED Talk is over. You never know. But think about it. That gap that used to be bridged by travel now maybe could be bridged through a whole lot of other different ways. Best of luck to you. Bye-bye.